Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel where I help you become a better artist. Today's lesson is all about drawing scales. This is going to be a fun one because a lot of times when we think of scales, we think of perfectly geometric shapes that have to line up on top of the skin or whatever surface that you're drawing. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. A lot of the fun things that happen when you're doing scales happens randomly. And it could be as far as putting them on top of wrinkles, different types of textures and skin like dinosaurs, bird legs, lizards, you name it, and even dragons and things that you make up. So what I have here on my screen is the red iguana species. I like these particular lizards because they have such a cool variety of different scales. And as you can see here, I've tried to show you the whole spectrum of a loose outline, so you can see some of the hands and the feet. And then as I worked my way out through the body, I put some tone in the stomach and then on the rib cage. And then as I moved up to the face, I'm selling the facial area. All right, so that is like the bread and butter of the drawing. But I can show you how I achieve these different types of scales here. So what I've done is I've left an area on the arm open so we can just kind of play with it and see what happens. All right, and there's also some indication right here of lined up scales, almost as if I was gridding it. And to be honest, I kind of was. And there are scales in nature, especially on lizards, where that happens. But without further ado, I'm going to explain to you what I actually have working for me here. This is a Faber-Castell 4B pencil. This is my pencil of choice. If you are interested in all the art supplies that I use, I have a link down in the description below with my Amazon portfolio where you can get a bunch of those different supplies. The black Prismacolor pencil I'm not going to be using today because it's just light sketching, but you have to order those separately on Amazon. I'm going to try to work on getting a link for that too. But anyway, without further ado, let's fill this area in. So have you noticed my pencil is sharp? It's very, very important that I keep a sharp pencil. All right, and now what I'm going to do, try to move my camera here. Okay, I don't know if my camera is going to be shaking, so we'll see. I'm going to try to lightly put in a nice coating of value. I already had one working for me, and it was doing pretty well. But I'm going to shift my sketchbook just a little bit, and then we'll see what happens. All right, so let me adjust this real quick. Okay, all right, there we go. All right, so now I'm going to hit this at a different angle. Right about there. Okay, you don't need much. You just need a nice layer or a coating of graphite that's pretty light, and then we can work on it. So when we look up at the face and the gullet and all of this fun stuff on the chin, I'm going to randomly place circles on the skin. Now, one cool trick to make scales stand out, and let me zoom in here so you can actually see what I'm doing. All right, there we go. That should help. So if you notice, I put in some not perfectly good circles, but they all have slight corners to them, which means it looks like they're puzzle pieces fitting into each other. Whenever you have a big space like this, it's a forearm, a thigh, a kneecap, or whatever, typically the area that is highest up and it's facing towards us should get the biggest scales. It's not always the case, but when it comes to concept art and making things jump off the page, you want to kind of follow that rule. And then you can bend the smaller ones around the edges of shapes so that it sticks out. For example, if you look at the iguana's cheek here and like the chin, I mean, if you go on National Geographic and actually look at those lizards, they have these huge scales right on their jaw. And then the scales get smaller as it moves up into areas where the skin needs to bend. That's part of evolution. So think about doing that for creatures too. All right, so out here, when the forearm, you're probably going to need more protection because it's an open area. And also the other thing to think about is following the contours of the actual shape that you're drawing. Okay, so this is basically a cylinder. All right, so I'm going to be rounding off some areas here. You can see where I've kind of done that up here on the tricep as it's moving down to the lizard's bicep. All right, so I've put in these grids. I literally just hatched it, 90-degree angles. But you can see that I kind of waved these shapes to follow the muscle. Here is a little different. This is a pretty big armored area. So in that case, I'm going to make sure that instead of just drawing big circles and big shapes where I don't pay attention to how it runs vertically on the arm, I'm going to run it horizontally, because it's going to be gridded this way from left to right, right to left. It's going to be going horizontally, so it's going to be wrapping around the arm. So you can see here, they're going to get smaller and flatter and more numerous in number. There we go. And then when it wraps around the bottom of the forearm, I'm going to get smaller and flatter because those scales are happening in perspective. And depending on how much time you want to spend on a drawing like this, if you spend a good amount of time getting this detail in and just grid out layer by layer, you can have a pretty realistic area of scales in a short amount of time. Now, when I say short amount of time, I don't mean 2 minutes and you're going to scale the entire creature. No, but a big enough area to where you can do those in chunks and then finish your drawing. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is, well, let's actually fill in a couple more of these areas. So maybe there's some big scales on the bottom and they're going to wrap around the forearm, but they seem flat because of perspective. So let's just roll those around. And notice how I'm not keeping the scales the same shape. I'm plugging in some smaller ones, some medium-sized ones, and they're all married together to give it variety. Okay, so when you look at up here on the face, check this out. I mean, there's all kinds. This set of scales on the jaw is different than the circles, and that's just on the neck. And then all of a sudden on the neck, you get these huge, almost like slabs of limestone that you put on a sidewalk. Okay, you got that there. And then you have that huge one right here. So there's a lot of variety happening in just this area. Well, that's the kind of technique that we're going to be doing today. Okay, so let's get a big enough area to work with and let's play with some of these shapes. Maybe something is like triangular. Okay, and then as I get to the wrist down here, there's some areas on the wrist where the carpal bones are for the lizard that's going to require more skin to bend, and there's going to be a joint down there. And you don't want huge scales because you would have to bend one of the huge scales in half. That's why smaller scales happen in areas where body parts pivot. Okay, think about lizards, but also think about bird feet and bird ankles. Okay, you got some pretty big scales on tops of the toes. You can see them on talons all the time, like eagles and cranes and such, and flamingos, but they tend to get smaller as you wrap around the bottom of it because that's where it's touching the ground, that's where it's bending, that's where all the muscle tissue is. Okay, so let's do that. Now it's going to get a little skinnier as we wrap around. I'm still going to try to do some different shapes here. All right, so now we have a pretty decent area to work with. I'm going to show you another trick. Make sure your pencil's sharp. Each corner of whatever scale you're working on, make it just a little darker. Not pure black, but just put little dots in, but kind of follow the edge of the scale. You're probably thinking, well, this isn't going to do much. Just wait until you see all this add up. I'm going to try to put in just little dots here and there. What that does is it brings attention to each new scale that you're doing very quickly. Also adds a lot of variety and a lot of texture to it. And it shows you that the scales are sitting on top of the skin versus being placed in the skin. This is where it really helps the 3D effect. And you want to make sure that when you put those little dark crevices in, that we're going to add some shading on the bigger scales. All right, so there's quick ways to do it. For example, the bottom of the arm here, I can get pretty dark in some of those little crevices. You just take your pencil again and shade over everything, including the darkness, including all the scale lines. Look what just happened. So now I added a core shadow on the forearm over top of the lines in the scales. And it's okay if it goes over the scales. You're not going to, the thing is, and I'm totally guilty of this too, whenever I would do details in the past, I would want to make sure every single detail is visible. And that is where realism escapes you and you start to get to the cartoony level and overwhelming level because, let's face it, We've all been there where we have detailed out an entire drawing from head to toe across the entire page, and it just looks the same. It's almost too hard to look at. So you want to add some variety in there. So I'm going to go back over the value that I added, like this. And now we have some like little crevices in here where the shadows exist. Okay, so here is where I was talking about adding some value on the larger scales. Okay, so think about the light source. The light source is coming down this way and it's hitting the forearm. So that's probably going to mean this area is going to get the majority of the light. And as light bends around the other sides, you're going to get the core shadow, and then you're going to get bounce light. All right, so what that means is if we put some more shapes in here as such, okay, and then we put in a little bit more value and we work our way up the forearm, watch what happens. If I push a little darker in a line, right like that. So you're probably wondering, wait, what are you doing? Why are you doing it in a line straight up the forearm? Well, let me explain. If you learn from Foundation Drawing 101, you're doing cubes, cones, cylinders, and spheres, especially spheres and rounded objects, you will know a core shadow exists where light and shadow bend around the side of a rolled object, and even an organic object. Same thing's going to happen over here too, just not as pronounced. You're going to have a core shadow, okay, and I'm using the side of my pencil for that and lightly going back over that path. But if you notice, see over here on the edge of the forearm how there's this little light area and it runs across this forearm up here. So I'm going to get darker here so it brings out that light area. That's the core shadow wrapping around the other side because the highlight is hitting right here in the forearm. Now here's the other thing to think about. And this is what makes scales believable, is when you start to put in the values across the other parts of the body and making sure that the forms come out. You definitely want the forms to exist. Pushing a little harder now to outline some of these scales that are larger. Okay, and then I'm going to add some ridges to the larger scale. So what that means is, I'll show you a larger version. Here's a scale, like that. Okay, well the scale has a top part and it also has a wall. So the wall could exist on the side of it like this. So here's the top, here's the side, and then the next scale is going to be attached to it. All right, so what you would want to do is, like, if the scale comes up and meets it right here, the wall is going to get a shadow, and then this part stays lighter. The same thing's happening over here, although, I mean, we're not super up close to the forearm to where you can see that wall, but we can indicate where it is. I mean, look at the size of that scale right here. That's like the bread and butter of the forearm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some scales around it at random little heights and different shapes and such. And then I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to lightly put in a little wall, right, like this. And I'm going to do the same with the scale above it. The reason the bottom part of the scale is what gets the wall is because this is the highlight. The light's coming down this way, so everything is going to get a little shadow down here. Now there's going to be other scales that are going to meet that one. So you're probably going to have to go up a little bit like this and play with them. Unless that's a scale that really pops off the arm, and then you're going to get a big wall like that. Almost looks like a bottle cap or something. There we go. So up here, there's not a lot of wrinkles that happen on these lizards in the joints. Like the neck gets the majority of the wrinkles, and then obviously you have some up here on the side. But if you look and see what's happening now, let's zoom out. Let's zoom out. So let's move it. Okay, let's move the sketchbook. And then you can see, did you guys see what I did? That was, I squeezed the drawing. Oh my gosh, that is such an outtake, and I'm leaving it in. You know what? I'm going to go further than that. Those of you that use Photoshop, please admit in the comments how many times you have drawn on paper but try to Control-Z it. You can't do it. Yep, it's almost second nature. That's so funny. All right, so now we have that. That's really coming apart now. Coming together, not coming apart. All right, so next, here's my signature right here. So I'm just gonna leave my signature in there. Maybe I can put some scales around it. But once it comes up to this arm crease, then you can start getting into the other type of scale that you have, and maybe add some of them right here. All right, so the next type of scale that I would like to show is this one. Now this one's really fun in that you get to shade different shapes. For example, let's go up here on the back, and then what we'll do is I won't push hard, but I'm going to lightly put in some small circles until it forms a black, almost like a blotch. The next thing to do is put in another blotch by it. However, you're going to let some of the white of the paper encircle that block. And then you're going to randomize another blotch like this. Okay, and then what you do is you choose another area, and you could do a smaller one. Just leave a path in between it. Try your hardest not to connect any of the shapes. Like this. Okay, so what that does is you're coupling together a bunch of these darker shapes, and it looks like dark scales, and it adds variety and dimension to it because the whiteness of the paper could be like its skin tone, and it's running through all of the scales, so it looks like the scales are actually growing from the skin. I mean, that's it, guys. Like, you really want to put the realism in there, and it's all about the realism. That's it. So if you're following along with me, just try some of these shapes first, and I would go as far as to say, try these shapes more than this, because I know that rendering and putting value down on a big area is kind of intimidating, especially, for example, this belly area. But really, it's about layering. If you're new to my channel, please check out my playlist that I'm adding this to, actually. The drawing techniques playlist. I do have a creature design playlist, but the specific drawing techniques playlist I think will help you learn my technique about laying volume down and value. So this belly right here, I believe it was about 7 or 8 different passes in different directions before I got that smoothness in there. And then what I can do is I can go in and put any type of scale in I want. It could be small circles. Here, let me zoom in so you can actually see what I'm doing again. So see those small circles that I'm putting in? It doesn't matter where I put them in, because the shading that's already down on the paper has value in between all the scales already. So that's why it's so important to get that foundation. You see that, the skin right here. I can put scales on the wrinkles if I want. The wrinkles are already done. You see the shoulder area, the deltoid region, right where I already had the deltoid shaded. Now I'm just putting in scales that follow the contour of that deltoid. So then when you zoom out, like you can see this area pretty well. So let's do that. All right, there we go. So now you can see, hopefully see the whole thing, and I can maybe bring it in. I don't know. Oh, I see the problem. There we go. Okay. I'm starting to learn more techniques on how to film with my phone. I'm in the process of getting an actual camera that I'm going to mount and everything. But in the meantime, I'm learning different filming techniques, so hopefully you guys can see it pretty well. There is a glare coming through my window, but it also is daytime. It's like the really good hour to film. All right, so there we go. All right, thanks for tuning in, guys. This was a lot of fun. I hope you learned a lot about shading the scales and adding texture. If you haven't already, like and subscribe if this was helpful. Comment below. Remember, tell me about all the fun stuff that you've done while trying to do scales, and like what you're learning, what you're struggling with. I love reading comments because it gives me an idea of what to do with the next video, and I have had a ton of different suggestions, so it has been wonderful. Join our Creature Design Workshop Discord for free. That link is in the description below. Again, if you're just tuning in now, check out this playlist. And also the link below in the description, my Amazon link, where it shows the exact tools that I use. I do get commission from that, so it helps the channel a lot. Helps me stock up on my pencils. It's great because I go through these like butter, man. It's crazy.